Tread lightly. Speak, fool. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. Tread lightly. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? Ah, at last. What is it now? Speak, fool. Finally. No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Faithless coward. Now, for the Lich King. Finally. At last. Tread lightly. This is more like it. Finally. Speak, fool. Now. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Faithless coward. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Speak for the Lich King. At last. Finally. What is it now? This is more like it. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last.
Our hero has fallen.
Tread lightly. Finally. What is it now? Speak, fool. What is it now? Speak, fool. No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? At last. Finally. I'll make sure you suffer.
Our allied town is under siege.
You will know endlessly. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. This is more like it. Finally. No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Speak, fool. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Tread lightly. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? At last. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. Speak, fool. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is at last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like
Our allies' town is under
at
siege.
last. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Finally. Frostborn hungers. Finally. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. Finally. At last. Tread lightly. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. At last. Finally. No one orders me around. Tread lightly. This is more like it. At last. What is it now? Frostborn hungers. At last. Speak, fool. Frostborn hungers. Tread lightly. This is more like it. No one orders me around. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. At last. Finally. At last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. What is it now? No one orders me around. What is it now? Frostborn hungers. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. Finally. Frostborn hungers. At last. Frostborn hungers. Speak, fool. At last. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it.
Our allies' hero has
Frostborn
fallen.
hungers. Finally. At last. No one orders me around. Finally. Speak, fool. At last. What is it now? Speak, fool. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Tread lightly. What is it now? Speak, fool. Tread lightly. Frostborn hungers. At last. Glory to the scourge.
Our hero has fallen.
Speak, fool. At last.
Our allies' hero has fallen.
Tread lightly. What is it now? Finally. No one orders me around. At last. What is it
Our
now?
allies' town is under siege.
No one orders me around. Tread lightly. At last. Speak, fool. This is more. Frostmourne hungers. This is more. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? Finally. At last. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. Finally. This is more. At last. What is it now? Frostmourne hunger. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. At last. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? This is more like it. Oh, sure you suffer. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. No one orders me around. At last. Speak, fool. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Speak, fool. What is it now? This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. No one orders me around. At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like
Our allies' hero has fallen.
at last. What is it now? No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. You will know endless torment. What is it now? Oh, sure you suffer. For the Lich King. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. At last. Glory to the Scourge. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers.
Our allies' tower is under siege.
At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Tread lightly. Finally. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. No one orders me around. Finally. At last. Finally. This is what is it?
Our allies' hero has
Frostmourne
fallen.
hungers. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. This is more like it. Speak, fool. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. For the Lich King. What is it now? Tread lightly. This is more like it. Finally. No one orders me around.
You will know endless torment.
This is more like
Your pain shall be legendary.
it. What is it now? Tread lightly. No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. At last.
Our hero has fallen.
Tread lightly. This is more like it. No one orders me around. What is it now? Finally. Tread lightly. Frostmourne hungers. No one orders me around. Speak, fool. This is more like it. No one orders me around. Finally. At last. Finally. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. No one orders me around. This is more like it. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. What is it now? Speak, fool. No one orders me around. Tread lightly. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. No one orders me around. Tread lightly. This is more like it. At last. Finally. What is it now? Tread lightly. No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. Tread lightly. No one orders me around. Speak, fool. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. What is it? Finally. Frostmourne hungers. No one orders me around. Finally. At last. This is more like it. At last. Finally. At last. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. At last.
Allies' hero has fallen.
At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. What is it now? This is more like it. Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Tread lightly. At last. This is more like it. Finally. This is more like it. No one orders me around. What is it now? Finally. Tread lightly. At last. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. Ah, at last. Finally. What is it now? No one orders me around. What is it now? This is more like it. Ah, at last. No one orders me around. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. What is it now? Tread lightly.
Our allies' hero has fallen.
Finally.
Our allies' hero has fallen.
At last. This is more like it. Tread lightly. Finally. What is it now? This is more like it. Tread lightly. At last. Finally. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. At last. Finally. What is it now? At last. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. Finally. No one orders me around. At last. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers.
Our hero has fallen. Our allies' hero has fallen. Our allies' hero has fallen.
What is it now? Finally. Speak, fool. At last. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. Finally. This is more like it. At last. What is it now? Finally. This is more like it. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. Finally. This is more like it. Frostmourne hungers. Speak, fool. No one orders me around. Tread lightly. What is it now? Finally. At last. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Speak, fool. Finally. This is more like it. No one orders me around. Tread lightly.
I wish only
What is
to
it
serve.
At last. Finally. Frostmourne hungers. At last. Finally. No one orders me around. What is it now? Frostmourne hungers. At last. At last. This is what. No one. What is it now? Fine. At last. Fine. At last. Fine. At last. Tread lightly. This is more. At last. No one orders me. Frostborn hungers. Finally. This is more like it. Finally. Last. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. At last. This is more like it. Finally. At last. What is it now? Speak, fool. No one would have been.
Forces are under attack.
Frostborn hungers. This is more like it.
Glory to the scourge.
What is it now? Speak, fool. Frostborn hungers. Finally. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally. No one orders me. Tread lightly. Speak, fool. This is more like it.
You will know endless torment.
Finally. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. At last. Tread lightly. Frostborn hungers. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers. Finally. At last. This is more like it. Frostborn hungers.
Our hero has fallen.
Speak, fool. This is more like it. Tread lightly. What is it now? Frostborn. Tread lightly. What is it? At last. Tread lightly. Frostborn hungers. Speak, fool. Tread lightly. What is it now? Finally. No one orders me around. At last. This is more like it.
I'll make sure you suffer.
Finally. Frostborn hungers. At last. What is it now? No one orders me around. Finally. This is more like it. You will end. Frostborn hungers. Tread lightly. At last. Speak, fool. No one goes to me. Frostborn hungers. At last. Frostborn hungers. At last. This is what is it? For the Lich King. No one has lived.
You will know endlessly.
Ah, at last.
You